birth control is problematic. So, the idea that birth control is some sort of wonderful thing is oversold. The reality is that everything in life is a mixed bag. It's a series of trade offs and benefits, centrally. That goes for anything in life. Very few things are one or the other. And birth control has been sold as this wonderful thing, blah, 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 blah. But let's really look at this. Let's sort of interrogate this. And why do institutions like the Catholic Church, for example, oppose birth control? Unbeknownst to many, the most admired Mother Teresa, Saint Mother Teresa, was herself against birth control. Why is this? Well, let's get into it. For decades and decades, we have received messages from wrestlers, former wrestlers, for example, like Jesse Ventura, saying, do not take steroids. Okay? Kids, don't take steroids. Why? Because they mess with your hormones. The hormones are this thing that unless you're sort of you have to be very careful when you mess with your hormones because they are essentially the building blocks of who you are. Okay? Physically speaking, physiologically speaking. And so when you play games with your hormones, you have to be incredibly smart in the way that you go about it. Because things, to put it crudely, can easily go tits up. And even if you play it smart, and no matter how smart you may think you're playing it, there's always a factor or dimension that you're not aware of, that you're not taking into account. In other words, this is a game that can never be played perfectly. There's always something that's going to happen. Now, why do I say this? Because rightfully, this has been used for decades to warn young boys, in particular teenage boys, against taking performance enhancing drugs, steroids, blah, blah, blah. Great. Fully on board with that. Regardless of the legalities, I think just in terms of social policy, wonderful. Everyone, we should all be on board with this, correct? However, suddenly, when it comes to contraception, suddenly any talk about hormones and so on and so forth is just thrown out the window as if a woman's health doesn't matter. Her health means nothing. Why is that? Well, because, quite frankly, I think there's a racist dimension to this. The likes of Bill Gates, for example, worried that Africa was overpopulating, and so Bill Gates would ensure that birth control was accessible for African women. And Bill Gates, I might add, who was in the Epstein files. Just going to put that out there. And I believe that to be there's a racial dimension there. Why are you so fixated on black people having too many kids? You know, that's just, it's absurd to me. That's number one. But I'm a pro-natalist. I am by no means a Malthusist. I've never actually been on board with Malthusian nonsense. So that's number one. But number two, the price that you pay for contraception, people don't really talk about. Why is there a spike in, for example, cancer in the ovaries amongst women today? Why is this when you didn't see it to the same degree in the past? And we know so because of archaeology, autopsies, records, and so on and so forth. It's because they're messing with their hormones. Because one of the things that happens when you mess with your hormones is you become susceptible to certain cancers, other diseases as well, skeletal issues, bone issues, and so on and so forth. And so, to me, if anything that feminists should be angry about, it should be contraception. That it seems to me that this is a drug that was introduced purely for the pleasure of men Think about it. That this is something that allows men to be able to engage in sex and so on and so forth without the responsibility of a child. And this is where I would say that women, you as women, need to understand that if a man is not willing to support you if you get pregnant, then you shouldn't be opening your legs to him. Similarly, if you're a man and you're not willing to support a woman if she gets pregnant to you, then why are you sleeping with her? Okay, so that's just sort of some a, a advice or whatever, sort of an observation that I would put out there. But again, we have to go back to the core point, which is that the trade-offs which are being sold to us by Bill Gates, David Rockefeller, and so on and so forth, is wonderful, and all of this sort of stuff is not actually true. I don't believe that risking, particularly very, very young women, by which I mean women in their 20s, taking this stuff is a good idea. And the reason why is because of this. If you are to mess with your hormones, to take steroids, just putting this out there, then ideally you want to be these factors. And even then, you're still in the danger zone, okay? A cis man who is at least 30 years of age with no major hereditary diseases. That is what you need if you're going to take up steroids. Because why? Because you're messing with your hormones. In other words, unless you are a cis man over the age of 30 with no major hereditary diseases who is still in danger, I might add, of dying prematurely, then you should not be messing with your hormones, whether it be through the use of steroids or whether it be through the use of contraception. Do not let the Rockefeller funded liberal nonsense telling you that you have carte blanche on promiscuity and in total absence of responsibility seduce you into thinking that contraception is some sort of solution. Yes, pregnancies should be planned. Yes, it's irresponsible to get pregnant when it's not the right time or whatever. But again, people have for thousands of years navigated this, and I'm going to just put this out there, okay? This is going to be shocking for a lot of people. But one of the main ways that it was prevented was through not engaging in the act itself. Again, I know this is shocking for a lot of people to hear, but the trade-offs are not worth it. I don't think they are. That you, your health matters, and you have a decision. Do you want to trade your longevity, your health, your fertility for the sake of personal pleasure now? Or do you want to preserve all of that and miss out on personal pleasure perhaps, or at least engage in other acts? I need not get explicit. You can be creative. You're an adult. You know what you're doing. My point is that this has been sold to you, and you were sold a lie, because I would argue that anything that is going to cause you ovarian cancer in the future is not worth the trade-offs. I'm going to be honest with you. That if you are engaged in something or you're taking something that is going to cause heart problems, again, I'm not letting men off, which is why I mentioned the thing of steroids. I don't want to be seen as attacking women, okay? I agree with men not taking that stuff. I fully agree. And I think the principle applies equally to both. That if you're going to be taking something and engaging in a practice that will cause cancer, that will cause organ failure, that will do all of these things, then it is not worth the trade-offs. That's number one. Number two, on a systems level sort of thinking or attacking of this, I don't agree with the over promotion, the overselling of contraception is some sort of wonderful, wonderful thing. Instead, what we as leftists should be doing is advocating for the material conditions to change. I don't deny that as a young woman today, with today's precarious economic conditions, that it can be scary with the thought of getting pregnant. or the risk of pregnancy. And we as leftists need to work on changing that. Broad economic justice and class liberation is how we deal with that. By making pregnancy not the financial economic burden that it currently is, we lighten the load on the individual, and in so doing, give them a viable alternative to the lie of the promise of contraception.